our purpose is to provide you with an opportunity or be able to make informed decisions. As you notice, these are readings from other school districts, but I think it's pretty, I think we all know that willful defiance in their case is basically what we would consider deliberate disruptions, okay? Which I'm sure most of you pointed that out. Want to recap some things that we talked about this morning. First and foremost is, as we've discussed over and over again, is that definition of deliberate disruptions. Can we operationalize it? Because once again, the word deliberate, until you know that that student truly did it with the intentionality that was mentioned earlier. So it seems to me that there's an overarching concern regarding what is deliberate disruption. What do we consider deliberate disruption? There was also discussion, as mentioned earlier, regarding suspensions with deliberate disruptions, and then also discussed in terms of those levels. So here's what we're going to do. You have information in front of you. You were presented some data this morning. You've had an opportunity to talk and kind of unpack deliberate disruptions. So here's what we're going to do as we move on to the next segment. We're going to put proposals on the board. Remember, we're collecting input and information. 3 proposals I'm going to put up based on the reading and the discussion. First proposal, and Mindy's going to write them down, is removing the category of deliberate disruptions altogether, because as we did this activity, it was evident that a lot of what some of you might have seen or considered deliberate disruption already had an existing category within the code of conduct. So first option, just remove it. Let's take deliberate disruptions off as an option for a student violation. Okay? And once again, if you want to know more about that, you could read the one that is at the yellow. No, that's a suspension one, sorry. Orange. Goes into depth about a district that actually did it. Okay? They removed willful defiance. And in our case, deliberate disruption. Second option we want to talk about and explore today is the suspension piece. So if a kid is in fact violating or has a deliberate disruption, there's an option to suspend. Okay? So the proposal that I'm going to point out that I want everybody to discuss is going to be the removal of the option to suspend. And once again, there's some information regarding what that would look like, or for a district that has done it and considered it. And lastly, and looking and talking about some of the points made this morning, knowing that there would still be, I would say, in terms of using your word, ambiguity, is the classification piece. You know, was discussed in terms of intensity levels, high or low. Would that be a consideration for revising? Okay. I am going to stop talking just for a few minutes at this point. I want to let these kind of sit with you for a second, do some reading, and I want you to really take some time to think, and then Kristen's going to go into some opportunities for advocacy with each of those options. So basically it's a moment of quiet for you to kind of do some thinking in regards to advocating for one of these 3 options. Removing it, so you don't give the teacher an option. They would have to then intentionally determine what other category that behavior would fall in, or just removing it. You have it, but yet you cannot suspend, and then once again creating a classification system. So about 2 minutes to think, and then Kristen's going to take it over from here for advocacy.
Okay. All right, so here's how we're going to run this discussion part of this. There are 3 proposals that Suzanne put up here as our ideas on how to do some further clarification on disruptive behavior. I like how we got to find the right balance here. I feel like some of us are too close, but the bigger table was too far. Anyway, we'll figure it out. So this is going to be an advocate for what you think would be in the best interest of the students and the teachers and the staff on clarifying disruptive behavior. So we will give anybody who wants to an opportunity to have 60 seconds, 1 minute to advocate for which of these top 3 options, of these 3 options you all think would be best suited in helping to clarify this category of deliberate disruption or disruptive behavior. So 60 seconds, talk about why you think it's the right decision to help improve the code of conduct, and we'll let that go on for as long as we need to, and then we'll try to bring this to some closure. So anybody want to go first with 60 seconds on which of these options they think is the strongest? She's ready.
I'll
Go
get
to
that out of
these.
the way. I think since we've already kind of, I guess, detailed or split up disruptive behavior right here, I think with the one I would go would be remove deliberate disruption.
Okay,
I'll just
you
go
talk
with
about
that.
why?
Well, like I said, because I think our discussion previously, we split those up, the verbal disruption, horseplay, so since we've already done that, and if all I have to look at are those three, that would be the one that I would, get rid
So
of.
remove deliberate
Yes.
disruption and
Mhm.
replace it almost with the categories
Yes.
that we come up with.
That would be my thought, yes.
Okay. And that's your way of clarifying that. Any other?
So you're just eliminating that one, you're not picking either one of these two? Is that right?
Right,
Is that your
yeah.
question, which
Yeah.
of these three? So you're just eliminating number one, but you're not advocating for either one of those?
No.
No.
So she is advocating that the right way to
Yes, is
clarify
that-
deliberate
yes.
disruption is to remove it as an item, essentially replacing it with these categories that we discussed earlier.
Yes, ma'am, that's it.
All right, is there another person that wants to advocate for an option? Jackie?
I'm not necessarily advocating, because all three are okay with me, whatever we decide, but I want to point out that there's three subcategories under deliberate disruption under the KDE codes. So we've got disruptive behavior, bus disturbance, that's all our bus referrals and bus suspensions. Then we've got the law violation of disorderly conduct. So under that 0-2 category, we've got three subcategories that KDE expects us to follow. So I don't even know the legalities of, if we could remove it, which I'm okay with, or if the KDE is going to expect us to track bus suspensions under that category or not, I don't know.
Well, that's a technical thing and we'll work through how to.
Okay.
KDE, we have to respect KDE, but our purpose is serving the staff and the students, so let's focus on, we'll figure out the technical part of it as we go along. All right, another advocate for one of these options, removal, create a classification, or remove deliberate. Sure.
Based on the literature and the conversation that we had, I am inclined to say remove it completely, but I'm going to do the middle of the road with removal of suspension for deliberate disruption, and it's primarily because the examples that we were presented in California, there was a bigger legislative statewide piece that did it for that district first, and then they were able to tailor that. And without that, and without the ability to guarantee some type of funding like Oakland Board did to replace it with something else, then I think that that's challenging to say, let's just get rid of it. Let's get rid of it and do what? Who's going to help us do something new? Because doing something new doesn't come for free.
Okay. Anybody else want to advocate?
I want to advocate for removing deliberate disruption completely. I think that the conversation we had earlier demonstrates that we are poorly equipped to define deliberate in terms of disruption. Our data indicates that we've done a poor job and have perpetuated incredible disparity, race-based disparity in this category. And I think that the cost of maintaining that type of disparity to prop up the school to prison pipeline along those lines is pennies wide, or what is it, pennies?
Penny wise and pound
dollars, or
foolish.
whatever it is. But essentially, the costs are great down the line as a result of some of these arbitrary, ambiguous, and damaging policies. So I would say we need to
This committee says to take this off.
Great.
So all you do is have your very
Okay, another advocate for one of these three options.
I actually want to talk about creating a classification system. I think one of the issues with deliberate disruption is that it's hard to define. So if we have a classification system, just like our discussion about verbal disruption, if you understand that this is verbal disruption 1, level 1, this is a verbal disruption level 2, then you can have all of those categories in one. So if we have a classification system, it would work for not only deliberate disruption, but really all of our categories that we have under the corrective strategies. So I'm advocating for a classification system because I think it will help to operationally define all of the categories and not just deliberate disruption.
I would agree with her, Naomi, because of the fact that not only if we define each individual thing into its own classification, we also have the ability to track that, going back to what you said, in having the disciplinary process administered for each individual item and knowing what is causing the problems and where we're going with it.
I want to make sure that this chart was clear. So this is from the Baltimore Schools Code of Conduct. It was shown to you by Dr. Dawson in last meeting's handout. And what this basically does is I give you a couple examples of how they've done the levels as opposed to an article. And so if you look at classroom disruption, which is on, I guess, the back page, so then it has talking, one category such as talking out in class or talking out of turn, picking on or teasing other students, and other behaviors that detract from student learning. And so they can use level 1 and level 2 strategies, which you'll see those on the other side as guidance. And then there's a second level of classroom disruption that is serious classroom disruption that directly affects the safety of others. And for that one, they add that you can go to level 3. So this would be how the classification system could work if we decide to go that path. This was just an example of how Baltimore does it as far as measuring the different intensity of a disruptive behavior, and then this strategy behind it. Okay, go ahead.
I would like to advocate for the creating a classification system as well. Knowing the information that we've received about being a more restorative district and knowing where we currently are and where we want to be, coupled with the fact that we're having this discussion about what deliberate actually means and having the problems operationalizing and how it looks when it's implemented, by really taking the time to classify behaviors and giving guidance on levels, I think that will start to create more discussion and thought about what instances are we actually looking at, and then what's the best approach to them that's going to assist students. So I think the road for us to becoming more restorative would be, but I'm not sure by removing deliberate disruption altogether, we have to do something. And so are we currently equipped at this point in time to be able to do that? Now, if there's the funding and the support's there where we can start this in fall of 2016, fine, but I don't think, based upon the information we've received in the presentation here and the presentation that we heard at the board meeting on Monday, we're not quite there yet, but we want to get there. So I think that's a good first step to getting us, in addition to increasing training.
Okay, was there somebody else?
Yeah.
Kim.
I also advocate for the classification system for all the reasons that have been mentioned prior. Also because I think it helps us better communicate with staff about what would be considered an appropriate reaction by administration. What are the things that best practice suggests should be handled in the classroom? When can you expect your administration to intervene? So that all of that is very upfront, and there is no question about how this behavior will be handled. Like on this Baltimore City one, it talks about in the classroom, administration support, etc. So I think that allows for clearer communication. Also, it allows for some context. For example, level 3 talks about documented interventions have been put in place. So some of those examples that we looked at the beginning, to me, seemed ridiculous, but we also don't know any context. We don't know, like, if these have been behaviors that have been repeated before, because progressive discipline, we don't ever look at data about what's happened prior to. And this classification system would allow some communication of, okay, this may look like a simple behavior, but really it's a level 3 because we have done all of these other things trying to keep the kid in the classroom, trying to work with parents, trying to work, et cetera, would be a little bit more clear.
I just wanted to remind everybody of our ground rules. If you take a look at ground rule number 3, it says, speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truth. Our views of reality differ, but speaking one's truth does not mean interpreting, correcting, or debating what others say. Speak from your center to the center of the circle using I statements, trusting people to draw their own conclusions. So let's make sure that we're doing that and not engaging in a debate with others' point of views and sticking to the task right here at hand.
All right. Is there somebody before Terry? Terry?
I really would like to advocate for 2 different posters. One is a classification system because I think it promotes communication. What I'm sensing from these short pieces of literature and from our conversations before, it's just knowledge about journeys of other districts, that there is a journey. And so, in other words, based on a classification system, suspension may not be appropriate for certain classifications, or
Yes.
certain definitions. So I think we need to be very cognizant of the literature that's available to say, we're not teaching anything when a child is suspended. So those 2 may be, actually, there might be a bridge between the 2. I'm also sensing from this literature is that there was a journey. In other words, there's a period of implementation of best practices to support positive responses. And so there wasn't immediate, in other words, complete cessation of deliberate disruption, but there was a period of time where the school district was tooling up and becoming more adept. So that may be part of our journey in learning best practices and gradually implementing them across our school district. So that may be a long-term goal, but there may be some short-term goals in the interim.
All right. Other advocacy points here. So, as this discussion has developed, and I'm listening to you, I think everybody seems to be very kind of in agreement that better clarification needs to be there. And it seems to be that most of the discussion is kind of centering around this creating a classification system, which would give us the opportunity, as Terry pointed out, to have different levels of intensity. So removing suspension if it's a small, lower intensity disruptive behavior versus a higher intensity, we can still leave the option to suspend. So what I'd like to propose here, and what I'd like to ask, is there anybody that has anything that we need to change or that we could do that gives them great pause about creating a classification system? Cherie.
Just based on the Baltimore classification, and I hope that if we were to do this, we do it a little bit better, not completely knocking it, but there are other behavior that detracts from student learning is not a class. I mean, that's what I said, right? Anything that you think. And so that's not better than anything else, because it still leaves that wide open for whatever you think should go there. So I don't disagree with the classification system. I disagree with having the vague wording in a pretty good classification system that you all gave as an example. So I mean, I like the idea, but we've got to steer away from that kind of
Yeah, that's what creates the ambiguity that we're trying to get rid of. So yes, and Baltimore was just an example.
Yeah, no, it's
And
a good example.
there's about 3 or 4 other districts that have said comparable things, and we could certainly pull best practices from all of them. Yes.
I would like to add, again, according to the literature, it looked like they removed the deliberate disruption of willful defiance to help with suspensions or to decrease. However, I'm looking at this, the failure to follow rules would just increase, I'm thinking here at Jefferson County. So I'm not really sure that would be an answer. I'm not sure what would be, but.
So that is a tandem discussion, and as Dr. Vanderhart pointed out, failure to obey staff and deliberate disruption greatly overlap. So we, the facilitator, I'll be brutally honest here, the facilitators were trying to figure out whether we lump this as one discussion or separate it, and we elected to kind of separate it as 2 separate discussions. So failure to obey staff is on the agenda as something else that may go into a classification level and further define that as well. So yes, I mean, I think all the data supports exactly what you said, and the facilitators and John Marshall agree, and we'll have a conversation about how to handle failure to obey staff as an addition.
And I think too, as an assistant principal, a lot of times we would choose deliberate disruption because it seemed like more, it was for a more harsh type of behavior. But if it's okay to suspend for failure to follow directives, then I think a lot of assistant principals would be okay with that.
Jackie?
I was just gonna say, I agree with Dorico completely, because they'll use failure to follow. And the other category we need to look at is 14, harassment, interference with students and staff. All three of those are abused and used, you know. And now I'm gonna trust and learn from the silence.
Yeah. Good job.
So,
All right, so here's how, so is there anyone that cannot live and cannot get behind an implementation of a classification system on disruptive behavior? Okay, let me ask this. Everybody who can get behind implementation of a classification system and can live with it as a structure for clarifying the code of conduct, give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so now, this is where we didn't know how this would go. We didn't know what you all would choose. We knew we had these three options, so now the facilitators are going to start to kind of favor. So we've gone to, in our earlier discussion, we've had this, okay, Suzanne, do you want to?
So we're basically going to refer to the list that we did earlier, based on the big brainstorming list and how we narrowed it. So, once again, we're collecting input. Okay, we know that we're not going to come to a final all in all today, and we're not going to come up with an exhaustive list today. Okay, collecting input. So based on the things that stood out for you, let's talk for a second in regards to levels, because we can do the 5 classification, we can do 3, we can do, as indicated in the PowerPoint, there was also a high intensity and a low intensity. So if we're just thinking about the type of disruption that would come across the desk of an administrator, or what happened in the classroom, leveling them. So let's just take a second to think about that for a second. Are we looking at, once again, it goes back to remember, district-wide implementation that we're going to look at. So the more choices we have for the 5 versus the 2 or for 3. So my point is, what are we thinking in regards to, based on the literature, would be an effective classification? And I'm only thinking right now, quantity. How many choices are we going to put out there for staff? Are we going to choose 2 choices, high or low? Or are we going to choose something that's more than 2? So just give me a number. Let's talk about numbers and why. So we're doing a little bit of the advocacy as well, since we have decided to kind of look at the classification system and explore that.
And I also think, I mean, this may, you know, kind of like you saw on this sheet where they have classroom disruption, now not doing the ambiguity, any other action, but on the classroom disruption, so do we want to have, we could even do a verbal disruption 1 and a verbal disruption 2, and then a horse playing and throwing things in and out of the seat. I mean, there's, and then, so there's all kind of levels with it.
Yes, sir.
What are the best practices around the number of levels that we see from other school districts?
It would vary, I'm saying, and I don't want to get too much into the content. So our expert over here, we've got, so the question was,
3.
3, okay, thank
There's
you.
still wide discretion within that, so as this assistant principal pointed out, if somebody wanted to be suspending kids and they could code it as a 3, just as Jackie said, they can use and abuse whichever one, so that's why training on implementation is critical regardless of what you do, but 3 is the answer.
Okay, so 3, that's something that's out there. So taking that, as we, and thank you, if I propose to put 3 as a classification system, okay, does anybody not agree with having the number 3 as just kind of quantifying for those classification?
Question. 3 for severity or 3 for consequence?
Oh, good question.
I was talking about severity.
Severity, okay, gotcha.
So the consequences will right
Corrective
now
strategies.
remain the way ours currently are. These are the strategies that you have at the options.
Gotcha.
So for a level 1, we may only choose to check the first 2 boxes. The committee may only decide to check, you know, parent, conference, or in-school corrective measures. For level 2, they may choose to suspend 1 to 3 days, and level 3, you could suspend 6 to 10 days. So that will be the next discussion, is what are the strategies at each intensity level to go by.
So is anybody not okay, I'm gonna do a negative poll, is anybody not okay with 3 levels for our classification system? All right, so we're gonna make a move to go ahead and look at the 3 levels of severity. For that, yes ma'am.
So that's the severity of consequences.
Well, we're gonna look at the.
Of the behavior.
Of
Of the behavior.
Of the actual violation.
So that's looking at the levels of guidance and counter. In other words, that's Baltimore. Baltimore is leveling the consequences. We're talking about the behavior, correct? Yes.
Make sure I clarify that up there.
Clarification. So Judy, when you were responding, that's the level of consequences that you were talking about in the literature.
The level, this is the intensity levels of the
Behaviors, got it.
but it's all subject to interpretation. When it's applied.
That's what training.
So I think the thing that may be confusing you, Terry, is that they refer to levels as their levels of strategies versus we, in our code of conduct, we outline specific ones. So really, don't pay attention to where they say levels, basically ours is the strategies. So we're kind of doing it a little opposite of them, is defining levels of intensity of the behavior, and our strategies will remain what they are. And then the question will be which strategies apply to which level of intensity. Does that make sense? Let's start with level one.
Brainstorming now. Once again, we're kind of mimicking the initial activity where we're just kind of thinking what would be considered just level 1 violation of disruptive behavior. So we're going from 1 being like most less severe, so to speak. Right? So anybody, what would be considered a level 1? Brainstorm.
You can look back at our list up here, you can look at our disruptive behavior list there.
Well, let's flip those. Because those are the top, these are the top ones that everybody voted on. You want to bring up the other ones? So you can see what you all had listed as disruptive behavior.
So anything that would be, so if these are our top, let me rephrase that. So if these are our top brainstormings from earlier that fall under deliberate disruption, keeping in mind, once again, these are not exhaustive, correct? So if I'm in a classroom or a school, something that is comparable to these offenses, and if they would fall under level 1, level 2, level 3, in terms of severity pieces.
Did you say the ones that didn't make that list?
Yeah.
Okay? So Mr. Dillon's proposal is, Kristen?
A level 1 intensity, so Mr. Dillon's proposal was putting the ones that didn't make our big list possibly on that. So cell phones, chewing gum, unprepared for class, off task, anything the teacher doesn't want, sleeping, tapping the pencil.
Are we going to put all that back on there?
Well, that's his proposal. We're not, that's his proposal to do that. We're obviously it's his proposal, but there's a whole group that.
That's an interesting starting point. Thoughts on level 1 being those original items?
I know we want to be specific, but there's got to be some way we can just say it's a minor offense that didn't really disrupt the educational process, like Ms. Harbaugh said. Something like, I know that doesn't really narrow it down, but I don't know if we really can do it, honestly. But that's minor, it should be minor.
I don't know if this makes any more sense at all, but instead of having level 2, 1, and 3, why don't we make it low, medium, and high?
Yeah.
This is a
Okay.
low disruption, this is a medium disruption, this is a high disruption.
And I think in Judy's data, and I wish I could pull it back up, I should have saved it, she showed where like level 1 was only affecting that student. Level 2 was affecting those in the immediate area around them, and then level 3 was it affected the whole class or the whole area that the student was in. So what does that feel like, as opposed, like how big the impact of the disruption is?
I think that's really important to look at who it is impacting. If it's just the one, the individual, if it's impacting other students around,
Or a safety issue.
right.
So sleeping
exactly.
is only really affecting.
But then but is it, I mean, I think about my college students, if they doze, then that's.
Everybody else wants to know.
Right, or, but when I address that, then it's now affecting everyone else. So I struggle with that individual, it's only impacting you in the classroom, because regardless, you're still in the community, and whatever you're doing impacts the community,
I
right?
think maybe it's hard to say it only impacts the 3 people around me versus the whole class. Maybe one way of looking at it is the duration of the disruption. That might be a way of looking at it. It's because it's hard to tease out, well, it's only impacting 3 versus 6 versus 9. But the duration of that disruption and how long it takes a teacher to get that child back in the right direction, that might be maybe one factor considers the duration of the disruption.
So as a means to try to help this group, but we're really wanting you to get your strongest opinions about what specific behavior. You already voted on these, right? You also decided that the best method was for there to be a classification system, right? And we already know based on Judy's data and Dina's data that we're all over the place on this. So we really, so you're right. Well, it's kind of hard to figure out which level, but as facilitators, we're helping you lift your strongest opinions. And then to put you want a classification system. Let's put it there. And if it's very hard for you here, then you might want to revisit, is this what you really want to do? If your decision is create a classification system, and if it's hard, just by already listening to these and doing the poll, if it's already hard for you without a student acting up in here, then you might want to ask yourself in a proposal here, is this the right path to go? If you're having trouble in this space, putting behaviors in levels.
And I'll add to that. I mean, are we having trouble, or is it just that we pushed too far, too fast, and we need to think about this for a minute? I mean, I acknowledge that we're moving quickly.
So what do we say was wrong with saying that it respect the person in the immediate area in the class? What was wrong with
I
that?
think who made that point, the challenge was, Cherie's, I think, point was, even if I'm sleeping, it's mostly affecting me, but if other people around me, they may want to sleep too, or also if Cherie corrected the sleeping child, then that interrupts the whole class. I think it was the definition of where that is, like where that lays out. Did I capture that right, Cherie?
Yeah, and that, I'm not saying that that's not possible, but as a categorize that, to use that as the measurement, like, to me, that's still pretty challenging to say that you're not impacting anybody else, Yeah, you are. But, so when you leave that open to just, I think what the challenge is with all of this is that it's hard to make everything objective, because it's, we know why. And I think that's why there's not a whole list up there. We're not like, oh yeah, put that at level 1, because you're like, oh, but what about this situation? And I think that's what's challenging about the category. That's why I said no suspend. Because I don't know how you categorize something like that.
Yeah, the only thing is, when I'm looking at that page 11 of that document, they, under classroom disruption, the distinction between those, one, you wouldn't get a classroom disruption referral if you didn't break that threshold of disrupting student learning first. And then, just for me, thinking about how those two delineate based on what we have there, is that first is that it's behavior that detracts from student learning, talking out of turn, which to me looks a little bit like the verbal disruption part. Then the threshold changes where the disruption directly affects the safety of others, which is throwing items, turning over tables, which you got throwing things, and even horseplay can reach that threat. I'm just pointing to, I understand what Sri is saying, but I'm thinking that's where, when I was thinking originally about the classifications, that's where I felt that this did a good job of delineating between something that's minor and something that's a little bit more serious.
Can I ask a question with the classifications? And I think this is why Baltimore has the catch-all as well. If we list these sample behaviors, what keeps an administrator from articulating that, well, this behavior is not listed, but it certainly falls under, level 2, because we're not gonna exhaust the list of things that could happen. So I know that they're just examples. I just guess my point is, how can we list the exact behaviors when there are so many other behaviors that follow? They're just examples.
I think we're giving examples and then maybe a general discussion, a general description. Yeah, a general description of what
Of the levels, if that's
So,
what he's gonna do.
one thought was impacting self versus area around you versus class. Joe's point was length of disruption. So, the sleeping child disrupted learning for 5 seconds versus arguing disrupted it for 5 minutes. Is there a way to gauge that?
Can I add too, and I think that what's emerging or becoming apparent to me anyway, is that if you're going to have a classification system, and if there's any behavior analyst in here, please, hallelujah, but if you don't have good inter-rater reliability and validity within this space, and you roll something like this on a district level, my God, we're going to be sitting here and next year having the same conversation. So, I think about, if you're an ethologist and you're looking at how you define one behavior, and if you, to get that good inter-rater reliability and validity, to have an instrument that's efficacious.
Well, I think that's the second part of the second piece of the puzzle. Is once you adopt whatever we're going to adopt, the training piece is the critical piece. So whoever's going to be doing the discipline or giving the reaction to that child's behavior, we need to be consistent from, say, assistant principal at your school at Fairdale versus at just within your own school, but then across the district. So it's really a matter of doing really good professional development and maybe even rating, giving the people the opportunity to hear some case studies. How do you folks rate these, and see how far are they off from what the majority of folks would respond to that. Does
So I'm
that
just
make
going to
sense?
pose a really quick question based on what you said. The input that was provided under a pre-classification system, are these more of an implementation training piece, perhaps, than it is creating the infrastructure for what we're trying to accomplish? So, hope that makes sense. But my point is this something that can be accomplished via the training mechanism, the implementation mechanism, once we determine the route we want to go? Or is a classification system necessary to move this forward? Or can this be done under another option?
And I think this piece of training is very important, and it's something we've discussed, and I know John Marshall finds it a very high priority, words in his mouth, of training on implementation and good case studies and good building of that rapport for people to understand why this will help in the classroom and at the school level.
So is this more of a training piece, we think? Are you thinking? So, thumbs up if you think this is just more of a training, just to get some.
You're talking about the reasons
Yeah, the
for creating
reasons
the
for
classification
this,
system are all around implementation.
Yes. Is it? So when we talk about the tracking piece, of course, well, we have tracking mechanisms in other venues, such as the other options that are on the code of conduct. Can we still be able to track behavior? Or however it is then inputted at that point? Or then assist with, like I said, defining piece. Is that a training piece? Okay. Based on whichever, well, I guess in that other case, it may be different, might look different. But I guess I'm trying to, once again, just explore those thoughts to where if these are the issues that provided the choice for this infrastructure, if these are some of the concerns, the question is for us to think about, or for you all to think about, is can these be achieved under a different option without taking away why you chose that to begin with? Because, in listening to some of the things in terms of defining the variability that is in fact occurring, which is good. Like I said, this is why we're having this discussion, opening that floor. So just things to think about. I know that Dr. Marshall mentioned about the what if, but once again, the training piece that we haven't gotten to, we want to think about, even though it's important to link the two together, what that infrastructure will then be to shape that training piece and the implementation piece.
Just a question about training, implementation, and then, of course, the monitoring piece. So if we adopted whatever, and there's still some ambiguity because there has to be, you train people, but just like what Judy showed us, there were elementary schools suspending under they were using deliberate disruption for profanity, but profanity is not a suspendable offense in elementary school. So, I mean, I don't believe that administrator didn't know that that couldn't be used, So a lot of the, people are inconsistent because they need to be trained is, no, you're inconsistent because you choose to code it differently on purpose. And so how does any tracking or training, if there's no monitoring and accountability for applying the code appropriately, how does that even work? Because we can train people. Jackie trained on the last code, but people are still using it inappropriately, and I don't think I don't think it's ignorance all the time. I think it's intentional.
I think it's intentional, and I think training-wise, Dr. Marshall's pushed for it last year. We get an hour, 2 hours to train people, and look at this discussion. And like Rashad said, if we can't figure it out, how the AP is going to figure it out in 1 hour? It's just,
And to add to that thought, I think that speaks, your point, Sherry, speaks clearly for me, in my opinion, to the need for this classification system, because what that administrator is trying to say is this behavior was so disruptive that this was the route I had to go, not because I'm just trying to suspend the kid just to suspend the kid, but the behavior was so disruptive that it warranted this removal. I mean, I don't think there's any administrators out there who just want to put kids out just to be putting them out. Maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I know I'm speaking from my experience, that doesn't happen. So that's why I think these levels are so important, because then it gives the opportunity to communicate how severe the behavior may have been.
So I want to pull us back into task here. We paused, zoomed out a little bit to revisit our decision to create a classification system. It sounds like the momentum is still there to do that. Everybody thumbs up for continuing the discussion on classification system? And then, let's get back to talking about how do we define low, medium, and high level deliberate disruption. There were kind of two proposals on the table. One is around how big the ripple effect was from the disruption, and the second was the length of the ripple effect of the discussion. Or do we want to go back to talking about specific actions as examples of what a low, medium, and a high was? Spitting has not come up, but somebody brought that up somewhere in a discussion prior to this as a disruptive behavior.
And maybe something that we could do if you're having a hard time listing specific behaviors, we could always give the examples as Cherie mentioned. Maybe what we could do here is define what is a level 1, what is a level 2, like a description, provide a description of what that is in terms of, since it's based on intensity, right? And then give some examples of what behaviors would fall under level 1, 2, and 3. And we just focus here on what is the specific description or definition.
I want to try an interesting task here. This may set the perspective. So the students in the room. Let's talk about from the student perspective. Not to put you all on the spotlight, but in your view, if you're sitting in class trying to pay attention to the teacher, trying to learn and do your work, talk about some different things and how they impact you. So if a student is tapping their pencil, how does that affect you all and affect your learning? And I know every student's different. And then versus if a student threw a piece of paper at the teacher, talk about some differences there.
Well, the tapping, that really irks my nerves. So, if it's to the point where you have to constantly ask that person to stop, and then I would tell the teacher hey, can you tell this kid to stop, But if it's throwing stuff, throwing a pencil, that could hurt somebody. It may not hurt a lot, but throwing anything, paper, anything that's disturbing people around you. To me, that's annoying, but.
Okay.
Well, the tapping pencil thing, it really never got on my nerves. I just usually just walk it out. But if you throw something at the teacher, that's, for one, that's just disrespectful. And for two, whatever you throw at the teacher, everybody else in the classroom would see that. And and they're gonna have a reaction based off of that too. So that's just gonna cause the whole class to be disrupted from learning.
Okay.
Because usually whenever a teacher gets hit with something, we've got other students that are like,
Yeah.
everything else.
And like makes it seem, and now everybody's like off task now because that one person's behavior.
So throwing things seems to be a pretty major disruption.
Yeah, that's how a lot of fights start, horseplay.
Okay. So let's, co-facilitators, what do y'all think about asking for a proposal to put something under one of these?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely there with a lot of discussion, so we'll make a proposal.
If somebody wants to propose a behavior to go under one of these levels.
For level one, I would propose out of seat would be level one. What harm does it do, or potential harm? It's kind of a low level. Teacher says sit back down, the kid sits back down, and that's the end of that.
So thumbs up for putting out of seat as a level one behavior.
Thumbs up for
But aren't there gonna be multiples? I mean, out of seat might be
Yes.
level 2 and level 3.
Let me pause for just a second. Stan, can you repeat what you said about, just repeat what you said?
Well, I'm kind of looking at all levels as level of harm to the people in the classroom and the learning process. Someone gets up out of the seat, teacher said, you need to sit back down, and the student returns to sit back down. And doesn't argue with the teacher, doesn't talk back, responds to sit back down, so the student sits back down. And nobody's harmed, other than you got some disruption of the learning temporarily.
So I think Jackie's point is there's like out of seat 1, 2, and 3, but out of seat 1, maybe just walking around, teacher says sit back down, it happens, versus out of seat 2, maybe repeatedly out of seat or out of seat touching a student or something.
But I think all of the behaviors would be that way, and it would go back to what Joe said in terms of how much time does this ultimately end up taking. Out of seat and you sit back down, it's great, but out of seat and then you hit someone on your way back and sit back down, or out of seat and you do a cartwheel. All of these happen, but they start with being out of seat, and so.
I don't, I didn't put it on here, but there was, and on another page on this Baltimore thing, they were defining fighting, and so they had like 4 levels under fighting, or it was touching or striking another student. So they had 4 levels, so like 1 was like an unintentional touch. So I'm walking back to my seat, and I bump into Dawn on my way back to my seat, versus the next level of I purposely slapped Dawn across the face with my pencil as I walked by. So I think there's, I know we can't judge their intentions, but at the same time, you can kind of, the teacher could make a judgment decision as to whether the movement was intentional or not. I think it's something to consider as well.
Like I said, I go back to what you were saying about like who the effect, because like you said, if you tell the kids to sit down and all the effects that night, but then you start getting up and then your group start getting up because that kid, then all of a sudden you affect it a little bit more, and then you got the class room up, and then you got chaos classroom. And so I think that it should be the impact, because the assistant principals have to interpret this. And they don't get an opportunity just to analyze of that. They need some kind of framework to work with. They don't get that kind of time. So even when you do have a lot of disruption, you can, as a principal, I can go back and say, well, what this disruption was, and who did it affect? Because I think sometimes administrators punish because of emotions. And so when you can be able to teach your assistant principals, that's not what we're going to do here. I think that, and that's just my opinion. I go back to that. I just think that because, like someone said, they have levels, and have all the levels, every last one of them.
So are you making a proposal
Yes,
to the
I am.
group?
Yes,
Don's made a
What's the
proposal.
proposal?
So Don, do you want to phrase your proposal, or you want me to phrase it?
No.
Okay.
There, Mindy.
Well, I think the proposal would be as far as defining the levels of the effects of who it affects.
Okay.
And that's when you start off putting those, and that's not, but as far as putting those categories over there. So my proposal is having a level defined as who it impacts.
Okay. So the proposal is to
Define the levels.
define the levels based on who it impacts. So, anybody that can't live with defining levels based on the ripple effect of the impact in the classroom. Thumbs up if you can live with that basic description and then giving some examples to discredit any ambiguity underneath that.
So,
Thumbs up, I mean, they're high. So it seems that we're a little split on this.
yeah.
And if I could just add to that, because I completely agree with Cherie that sleeping, while it may seem to only impact that one person, does impact the classroom community, but all of these do. And so what we are looking at is how do we respond to that? And if we're gonna have to come up with a way to respond, then we have to have another way of looking at it, because they're all going to disrupt the community of learners. They're all interfering with that expectation that we're here to learn. But when we look at applying a consequence, you know, who did it most impact, or what was the range of that impact, I think is where we have to kind of find some compromise.
We're talking about, but we're talking about it, but if we could just, I want to make sure we're guiding this discussion right. Don made a proposal to define, am I right, that you want to define these levels? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and we had, and if we could, and we had a thumbs up that folks wanted to go into defining these levels that make it easier to put some of the behaviors that match those levels in there. Now, just thumbs up for understanding of what his proposal is. Thumbs up if you get it. If you don't get, if you want a little bit more clarification around his proposal. Okay, so everybody gets what he's proposing. Okay, so thumbs up for his proposal of going into defining these categories first, so we can get some clarity around it. Up high. So, any other proposals then? Because we're kind of split.
Is there a way, let's do this kind of the amendment format of, is there a thing we can take away or add to Don's proposal that would make it more, something you all can live with?
I think it goes back to another question I had, which was about how do we know that these behaviors have a statistically significant impact on the long-term learning of students? And if we could say, based on empirical evidence, we know that these types of behaviors, when occurring in a classroom, impact the learners in that room, and this is how their grade levels are impacted over time, that may help us to determine which of these behaviors are the biggest issues.
Well, we did do that. I know you weren't here that first time, but Judy kind of touched on that. If she's still here, if you want to share more about that, but the reason why we're focusing on this specific category is because this is where we have the most suspensions. So they're minor offenses, but it's leading to a lot of time out of the classroom, right?
Well, I think the question he's asking is deeper than that. It's that the behavior or the strategy used to do it has a long-term effect on their learning. And I think the best answer I can give you is that the number of referrals or being suspended have great impact on like connectedness to school and attendance and one other category.
For children being suspended.
Yes.
Right, and that's my point. So are you saying that these behaviors then are at such a low level that they don't impact the learning of other students, empirically speaking?
I would have to ask a data question. I mean, that could be some,
I think we really need, if you want to make a proposal here, because as the group has decided to move to levels.
I think it's.
So, but I'm asking, like, what is he proposing? So, to make a proposal to make it a little bit more clear.
It's usually more of a question than a proposal.
Well, so it was a question, yes. And it sounds like you're saying that you already answered the question in terms of behaviors that have an impact on other students' learning and ones that don't. And then this is the broadest category of behaviors that disrupt the classroom, but also not the most significant behaviors that actually have an impact on other students.
Yes.
Okay, so it almost feels like we're defining a category that is arbitrary.
I think the reason.
Yeah, well, and I think he's right. That's the
Like level 1, low level.
I think the difference is that kids are, like Dr. Vanderhart pointed out, that kids are being suspended for, which is proven to be an ineffective way of deterring behavior for a wide range of activities. And so the goal in clarifying it was to be able to better define which disruptive behaviors were suspendable and which do not merit a suspension.
And we're calling it disruptive anecdotally, but what we're saying is that empirically they're not actually disruptive, and that this entire category of behaviors actually isn't impeding our students' learning on a significant scale.
Right, and I think really what it is, I mean, because I know that you initially said to remove disruptive behavior. And I know that that's your opinion, and I know a couple of other people in here that feel that way. If you think that you can stick with us, since the majority of the group is chosen this, do you think you could stick with it a little bit longer and kind of help us maybe firm this up a little bit more to kind of make it closer to something that you can live with?
Sure, and I don't mean to run from the pack, I just didn't know that conversation had already occurred.
I think it's
This is just a question. I just really would love to stand on the shoulders of what's out there as far as the literature, and I would love to be more informed and have some specific information to be able to contribute more to this conversation. So I would love some background reading for the next.
Background reading specific to.
Well, I'm just looking at classification systems. I'm looking at defining behaviors. I'm talking about what's significant, statistically significant to really make a difference. So if we're going to put all eggs in this basket, I want to be more informed.
So Terry's almost making a proposal to table this discussion until we can have a deeper understanding, review more data, which John Marshall's office can provide around examples of other levels or best practices around levels data on what it kind of provides. Let's take a couple more discussion points here and then we'll go on. Sheree?
I was just gonna ask Judy, do you have, like, in your mind, from the literature and the research that you do on this topic, do you have suggestions that maybe we could start with to tweak? You know, I mean, I hate to start from ground zero. If there's someone in the district who's an expert in that area, knows all the literature, could we, you know, ask, and not necessarily today, but to back up what Terry says, but have her, you know, do the best practice or what she would suggest, and then we as a group tweak that? I mean, does that make?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jackie, did you have something?
I did with Joe before me.
I'm just thinking, thank you, Jackie.
Sure, Joe.
Just when you talk about levels, maybe consider what factors do we take into account if it's a level 1, level 2, or level 3? And as a behavior person, I tend to look at 3 factors: intensity, duration, and frequency. Okay? And that might be the starting point. So, because you're never going to get every infraction listed. You know, you're just not going to do that. But maybe that's a way of framing it: intensity, frequency, and duration. And that gets to the impact using those kind of factors. Does that make sense?
Okay. We capture those 3 things somewhere: intensity, duration, and frequency. Okay, so Jackie.
I'll just say real quick, on the good side, this whole category last year allowed for 6 to 10 day suspensions. And we have cut that way back so that we're only allowing 1 to 3, which at the district level, we don't even see these suspensions. I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. This is at the local school level, and we do need to monitor it more and do more training, but this is all local school stuff right here. And then I love Joe's 3 things, but once again, intensity, you know, Rashad might think that's pretty intense, and I might think that's nothing. So there we go again, it's ambiguous, I think.
One more comment.
Data from Maryland, I think, would give us a helpful guideline on some of this. If you look at the second page, serious classroom disruption directly affects the safety of others, i.e. throwing powerful items, turning over tables, disrupting a fire drill. Sounds like a perfect definition of a level 3.
And they expel in Baltimore. We don't.
Okay, so here's where I think, based on what we're hearing from the group and the facilitators agree, is that we will continue this discussion at the next meeting. And the discussion will continue around the levels as well as other behaviors on the list. So we'll have to kind of crunch in some time here. on 2 of them, and that the second kind of proposal is to make sure we provide data around examples of other communities on levels and/or data on impact on student learning of the disruption, and any other helpful documents. Heather?
Can we get the data before we come to the meeting?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yes, because this is, yes. Anybody who can't live with tabling the discussion, getting more data, and getting more best practices examples. Okay. We told you all this was going to get an intense discussion. I think we kind of got there today, but I think I'm really impressed and honored to be working with this group that is very respectful of each other, honorable of each other, thought-provoking, asking the hard questions, not being afraid to speak your mind, and then be willing to come back to the table again next time. So, plus Delta or?
Yes, well, I'm going to just reiterate, just so we're all clear again, just the proposal will be to obviously have the data, but then working from a springboard of such, based on work from the experts in regards to having some type of template or something to start with. Am I correct? Did everybody understand? So we're going to have something to start with as a springboard into the discussion. And what we have will be based, of course, on the data and the research and so forth. Okay? All right. Make sure that you sign in, and then we're gonna wrap up with plus the deltas. Make sure you sign in, so we will have that, your email address for us to be able to send you information. So just to kind of, my role is to just look at the desired outcomes, to kind of focus us on what we did earlier. And that last one is most important, which is collecting the input as it pertains to our core challenge of disruptive behavior. And I think that that we spent a lot of time, but it was definitely good time, because as reiterated earlier, just once again, as a facilitator, I want to remind you of the discussions that took place today. If we, as a small group of people, are really spending some time, which is good, pontificating over something like this, as we move forward for implementation, I think it's important for everybody to be mindful of that as well. So, plus deltas, and if you might have noticed, a couple of changes were made based on your plus deltas, so we are listening to your plus deltas as we move forward to plan the next meeting. So yes, feel free at this time, opening the floor for any pluses and deltas. We'll start with pluses as Kristen scribes.
Things that were good about today.
Focus on data-driven decision-making.
There you go.
The process encourages discussion.
Process encourages discussion.
Celebrate the diversity of thought and background.
So good committee composition. John Marshall.
Yes, a list of disruptive behaviors and voting for them.
No pluses.
I think discussions have been very respectful, and, we've all respected each other's opinions, and I really appreciate that, being a part of this process.
Pluses. Deltas. Do better, different. Kim.
Sure you not just have a level 1 delta?
Oh, yeah, we're good.
More coffee.
Okay, so here's what happened. I'll be honest about this. Last time I bought 2 coffees,
And we didn't
and we didn't drink the second one.
Oh, well, you let us know next time, we'll take it.
We'll take it.
Okay.
We'll take care of it.
I'm just kidding, I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, we both were thinking it. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I tried. Heather.
Can we get more of an outline of an agenda of what's to come? Because you guys mentioned that's gonna come up later, that's gonna
So
come
you all
up.
want to know what we're going to discuss in the rest of the meeting?
Yeah, so we can have an idea when
Beforehand.
it's kind of ahead.
Yeah, so we can kind of try and do that, but you all have to not hold us to that too
No.
much. Because just like today happened, we had planned on getting through all the levels today.
Right.
So now we're going to change next meeting's agenda to kind of
Even if it's
rejigger it.
not on a timeline, like of the date, but at least that we know that that conversation's coming up
Okay.
ahead.
just have a clarification or a question. Does that mean suspension is off the table since we are now discussing that? So we can go back to that?
Yes, we could, a discussion will happen around what strategies for each of the levels. So
Okay.
we could say suspend at all levels, we could say suspend at no levels, we could do something in between. So the strategies is like this, let's define what the levels are, and then we'll define the strategies for the levels.
And that would be on next meeting.
Like I said last time, the teachers. We need
So they were invited, we're not sure what happened, but we will, work on making sure
3 in
teachers are in attendance.
Yeah, promise, 3.
They're teaching. This young lady has.
Yes.
I wanted to do a plus, so the
Yes.
articles that we read, to kind of like base our opinions on them.
Right.
I think a big plus is reaching out to the two students and asking their opinion, because that's where the rubber meets the road. We can speculate all we want about what disrupts the class, but only the students really know how it affects them.
So I think, Michaela, right, and Jacob, that's an encouragement for you all.
I
Speak up.
wish we had more students in here.
Speak up more. Jackie.
I'm kind of piggybacking on a delta that Dr. Dawson and Principal Harbolt about the coffee. If we could get rid of the donuts, maybe get some fruit, something healthy. We're already walking a mile to get here, we might as well get something healthy.
We brought you to the zoo as your exercise for the day.
I did, I appreciate it, I really did.
I think the zoo's a fun place to have this. Okay, any other pluses or deltas?
I got new hits.
All right, Heather.
Just make sure you guys use darker pink colors
Oh,
when
yeah,
you're ready.
darker markers. All right, all right.
One more thing before we go into Delta's level 1. PowerPoints from last week. We're supposed to get, I understand, you probably didn't have all of our email addresses, but
Okay, so did you not get them?
did you guys? I didn't.
Sorry.
Never mind, I didn't get it.
We sent them out, I don't know,
Yeah.
so, okay, there was another, plus somebody else had them to Terry.
I didn't get one.
I just don't.
Oh, print out some PowerPoint. Okay, we think we're done with PowerPoint.
Yeah, thank you.
Question, and it is a plus. I really like having Judy here, particularly because she focuses on discipline stuff, and that's not knocking Dr. Gossett.
Yeah.
But will one of them be here every week?
Either Judy or Jimmy.
Oh, or
Raise your
Jimmy.
hand,
Sorry,
Jimmy. Say
Jimmy.
hi,
Or
Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Either Judy or Jimmy will attend.
Okay.
Every week.
So that's my plus, that
Okay.
I think somebody from
Data rep.
that will leave it.
I know I'm not on the board, but I do have a question that might be a delta.
Go,
Would it help if I created like a website that was just a blog, so that maybe we could have ongoing discussions between the 2 weeks? You know, just, I don't know if that helps speed things up. or if, like,
Thoughts?
I don't have time to vlog.
Jackie
I'll
says he
be
doesn't have
honest
time to
about
do
that.
it.
I appreciate the offer, though.
Yeah, I think it's a great offer, but it
Plus.
doesn't seem to be reception from the committee. Thank you, Jimmy.
But please still keep coming.
Yes.
All right. You and Judy both, and Dina, it's very important to have data focus.
Okay.
And you too.
Any other pluses or deltas?
Yes. Last time I'd advocated for an early childhood person to be here, and Judy mentioned it, so was that ever considered?
I think we were sensitive to how big the committee would give, and that's a John Marshall.
It was considered.
Anything else? All right, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.